My name is Elena Parker. I'm 33 years old, and until the night of my mother's 60th birthday, I believed I knew exactly who I was in my family. I was wrong. The restaurant was louder than it needed to be, too many clinking glasses, too much laughter that felt rehearsed. My mother had insisted on this place. White tablecloths, live pianist, candlelight that made everything look softer than it was. She sat at the center of the long table like a queen holding court, her silver hair styled perfectly, her navy silk dress pressed smooth. I noticed, not for the first time, that it was the same designer brand she'd once said was too expensive when I wanted to buy myself a coat. I'd paid for this dinner. Every plate, every bottle of wine. I didn't mind. That's what I told myself. When the server poured champagne and tapped a spoon against his glass, the room quieted. My mother stood up, smiling wide, lifting her flute high. To family, she said warmly. To 60 years of life, sacrifice and love. Everyone clapped. I did too, though something in my chest tightened. She hadn't looked at me yet. Then she did. And to my daughter Elena, she continued, voice clear, confident, who's finally doing well enough that we can all breathe easier. A few people laughed politely. My cousin raised her eyebrows. I felt heat crawl up my neck. My mother took a small sip, then added, casually, like she was announcing dessert. Starting today, Elena's $5,500 monthly salary and any bonuses will be going into a shared family account. It's time we manage things properly. The room went silent. Not dramatic silence. Not gasps. The worst kind. The kind where forks pause midair. Where people glance at each other to check if they heard correctly. Where no one wants to be the first to react. I didn't laugh. I didn't breathe. Mom, I said quietly, hoping, stupidly, that this was a poorly executed joke. What are you talking about? She waved a hand. Oh, don't be shy. Everyone already knows you're the responsible one. My aunt smiled thinly. My uncle nodded like this all made sense. Across the table, my younger brother Mark avoided my eyes completely, suddenly fascinated by his napkin. You're not serious, I said louder now. My mother tilted her head, the way she used to when I was a child and didn't understand something obvious. Of course I am. You make good money. You don't have children. You live alone. It's logical. Logical. That's my income, I said. You can't just announce something like that. She chuckled. Relax. We'll set it up properly. Transparency, structure. No more scrambling when someone needs help. Someone. Always someone. Mom, I said again, my voice shaking now despite my effort to keep it steady. Did you ask me? She looked genuinely confused. Ask you what? If the room had been a stage, that would have been the moment the spotlight burned straight through me. You're embarrassing her, my aunt murmured. Not to my mother, to me. My mother sighed, placing her glass down. Elena has always been dramatic, but she'll calm down. She always does. That sentence landed heavier than the salary announcement. Because she was right. I'd always calmed down. I stood slowly, my chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. Heads turned. The pianist stopped playing. I'm not doing this, I said. My mother laughed, a short, nervous sound. Sit down. Don't make a scene. You already did, I replied. Mark finally looked at me, eyes wide, but he didn't say a word. I grabbed my purse, my hands unsteady. This isn't love. This is control. Oh, don't be ridiculous, my mother said sharply. Family shares. You don't get to opt out when it's inconvenient. I didn't answer. I walked past the table, past the candles, past the stunned faces that had been smiling minutes earlier. No one stopped me. No one followed. Outside, the night air felt colder than it should have. My chest hurt, like I'd been holding my breath for years and just realized it. I sat in my car for a long time before turning the key. By the time I reached my apartment, my phone was already buzzing. Mom. Mark. An unknown number. Then Mom again. I didn't answer. Because standing in that restaurant, listening to my salary turned into a family asset, I finally understood something I'd spent my whole life avoiding. That dinner wasn't about money. It was about permission. And I'd just taken it back. The first time my mother asked me for money, she didn't call it help. She called it trust. Elena, she said softly over the phone, years before that birthday dinner, I wouldn't ask if it weren't important. But I know you understand responsibility. I was 24, fresh out of graduate school, still living in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled faintly of paint and instant coffee. My first real job had barely stabilized my bank account, but hearing her say my name like that, careful, deliberate, made me feel chosen. That was the trick. It was never framed as obligation. It was framed as recognition. Your brother just needs help covering a gap this month. Your uncle's business hit a rough patch. I'll pay you back after things settle. Things never settled. At first, it was small. A few $100s here. A quick transfer there. I told myself it was temporary, that families did this for each other. When my mother thanked me, her voice full of relief, I felt useful. Needed. Needed is a dangerous thing to be when you grow up, learning that love is conditional. Mark was always the sensitive one. That's how she described him. Sensitive meant protected, excused. If he struggled, it was because the world was unfair. If I struggled, it was because I wasn't managing properly. You're stronger, she'd say. You always have been. Strength, in our house, meant silence. By the time I turned 26, the favors had names. Emergency fund, short-term support, family cushion. No one ever used the word loan. When my mother's credit card got declined at a grocery store, she called me from the parking lot. I could hear the embarrassment in her breathing. I hate asking, she said, but you don't want people thinking we can't manage, do you? I transferred the money before she finished the sentence. Later that night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I told myself I'd set boundaries next time. There was always a next time. When Mark quit his job because his manager didn't respect his creative process, my mother framed it like a tragedy. He's lost, she said. You know how fragile he can be. Fragile was another word that never applied to me. I covered his rent for 3 months. I didn't tell him it was stressful. I didn't tell him I was pulling from savings. I smiled when he thanked me like it was expected, not extraordinary. By then, my salary had grown. Promotions came. Bonuses followed. I lived modestly. Same apartment, same furniture, same habits, because every raise felt like it belonged to everyone else before it belonged to me. When my father passed away, everything shifted permanently. He collapsed in the kitchen one morning. No warning. No goodbye. A suddenness that hollowed out the house. Grief made my mother brittle. She leaned on me in ways she never had before. Practical ways. Financial ways. I don't know how we're going to keep the house, she said 2 days after the funeral. Your father handled all of that. I knew what she was asking without her saying it. I took over the mortgage payments. Month after month, I sent money to a home I no longer lived in, justifying it as temporary support. Mark moved back in but never contributed. He's grieving, my mother said whenever I brought it up. So was I. But my grief didn't get days off. I worked longer hours, took on extra projects, told myself I was lucky to have stability when others didn't. That narrative kept me compliant. Every time I questioned the imbalance, my mother had an answer ready. Don't keep score. Family isn't transactional. You don't want to be selfish. Selfish became the worst thing I could be. The family started planning around my income without consulting me. Vacations were booked assuming I'd help out. Repairs were scheduled before I agreed to pay for them. Once, during a holiday dinner, my uncle joked, "Well, as long as Elena's doing well, we'll be fine." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. Inside, something tightened. By the time my mother stood at that restaurant and announced my salary like a communal resource, the groundwork had already been laid. The expectation was established. The entitlement normalized. What shocked them wasn't that she said it out loud. It was that I didn't nod along. Looking back, I realized something painful. They didn't suddenly cross a boundary that night. They revealed one I'd never been allowed to draw. And once you see that clearly, you can't unsee it. I didn't go to work the next day. Not because I couldn't function, but because for the first time in years, my body refused to move on autopilot. My phone buzzed nonstop on the nightstand. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Mom. Mark. Mom again. A cousin I barely spoke to. I let it ring. By noon, the messages started changing tone. At first, concern. Are you okay? You scared everyone last night. Then confusion. We didn't mean it like that. You took it the wrong way. By evening, the edge crept in. You can't just walk out on family. Mom's heart isn't strong, you know that. That one landed exactly where it was meant to. I stared at the ceiling, remembering how often my mother's emotions had been positioned as my responsibility. If she was upset, I'd caused it. If she was anxious, I needed to fix it. But this time, something felt different. This time, I hadn't reacted emotionally. I'd left. The following afternoon, an email came through. Not from my mother. From Mark. Subject line, family planning. That was when I knew this wasn't about hurt feelings. It was about logistics. The email was long, structured, bullet-pointed. He wrote about streamlining support and removing stress from emergencies. He suggested a shared account, monitored, of course, to keep things fair. Fair. According to his proposal, I would contribute a fixed monthly amount, just under half my take-home pay, until things stabilized. No timeline, no criteria, no mention of my own goals. I closed the email without responding. An hour later, my mother called. This time I answered. "Elena," she said, voice soft, careful. "Why are you making this so hard?" I leaned against the kitchen counter, steadying myself. "Because you announced my income like it belonged to you." She sighed. "That's not what I meant. But it is what you did." A pause. Then, sharper. "You embarrassed me." There it was. Not concern. Not regret. Image. "You walked out in front of everyone," she continued. "People are talking." "I didn't ask for my salary to be discussed in front of everyone," I replied. "You're missing the point," she snapped. "Families don't operate like strangers." No, I thought. They operate on expectations. By the end of the call, she'd circle back to the same argument 3 times. I was being selfish, I was overreacting, and I'd always come through before. That last one stuck with me. Because she was right. I always had. 2 days later, a letter arrived at my apartment. Printed. Formal. Addressed like a business correspondence. I stood in the doorway reading it, heart pounding. It wasn't a request. It was an expectation. My mother wrote about shared responsibility, long-term planning, family unity. She referenced my current income level and capacity to contribute sustainably. Then came the sentence that made my hands go cold. "We'll need the first transfer set up by the end of the week, so we can avoid further disruption." Disruption. Like my independence was an inconvenience. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the dinner. Just a deadline. I sat on the floor for a long time after that. Not crying. Thinking. I thought about every moment I'd swallow discomfort to keep peace. Every time I delayed my own plans because someone else needed something more urgently. Every time I'd been praised for being reliable, right up until I wasn't. The pattern was suddenly obvious. As long as I was silent, I was loved. The moment I hesitated, I was a problem. That night, my phone rang again. This time, it was my cousin Leah. "I shouldn't be telling you this," she said quietly, "but after you left the dinner, things got tense." I listened. "Your mom tried to smooth it over. Said you'd misunderstood, that you'd already agreed in private." I laughed once, short and humorless. "I didn't." "I know," Leah said, "but they're acting like you did." That was the moment something inside me settled. They weren't waiting for my consent. They were waiting for my compliance. And when I didn't give it, they tried to rewrite the story. I thanked Leah and hung up. Then I did something I'd never done before. I stopped explaining myself. No replies. No clarifications. No defending my character. Just quiet. Because I was starting to understand that this wasn't an emotional misunderstanding. It was a system. And systems don't change because you ask nicely. They change when you remove what they depend on. I didn't make my decision in a rush. That's what surprised me most. There was no dramatic music in my head, no rush of anger, no shaking hands hovering over my phone. Just a quiet, steady certainty that felt unfamiliar and irreversible. The morning after the letter arrived, I opened my laptop and logged into my bank account. 4 years, my paycheck had gone into the same account my mother knew about. The one she'd occasionally asked me to check for her when something didn't clear fast enough. The one she treated like a shared resource without ever saying so directly. I opened a new account instead. Different bank. Different login. No alerts tied to my old number. Then I redirected my salary. It took less than 10 minutes. I stared at the confirmation screen longer than I needed to, half expecting guilt to rush in and stop me. It didn't. Next, I canceled the automatic transfers I'd set up over the years, mortgage assistance, temporary support, subscriptions I wasn't even using. One by one, the financial threads tying me to everyone else unraveled. I felt lighter with every click. That afternoon, I sent a single message to the family group chat. We need to talk. Lunch tomorrow. 1 p.m. My treat. The responses came fast. Mark, good. This has gone on long enough. My aunt. So glad you're coming around. My mother. Proud of you for being mature, sweetheart. That last one made my jaw tighten. They still thought this was a negotiation. I chose the restaurant carefully. Neutral ground. Quiet. No spectacle. Somewhere we couldn't raise our voices without drawing attention. I arrived early, wearing a simple black blazer and jeans. Not armor, just myself. I wanted to be calm. Present. Unmistakably done. My mother arrived first, smiling too brightly. She reached for my hands as if nothing had happened. I knew you'd cool off, she said. You always do. Mark followed a few minutes later, carrying a slim folder tucked under his arm like a prop. He didn't hug me, just nodded, businesslike. We sat. Before menus were opened, Mark slid the folder across the table. We simplified things, he said. To avoid confusion, I opened it. Spreadsheets, charts, clean formatting, percentages highlighted in blue. They'd already decided how much of my life I was allowed to keep. 45% of my monthly income. 70% of bonuses. No defined end date. I closed the folder gently. Is this a joke? I asked. My mother frowned. Why would you say that? Because you're discussing my money like I'm not sitting here. Mark leaned forward. Elena, this isn't personal. This is practical. I looked at him. Really looked at him. You don't get to call something practical when you're not the one paying, I said. My mother's tone sharpened. Watch how you speak. No, I replied. I've been watching how all of you speak for years. The table went quiet. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick envelope, placing it between us. What's that? My mother asked. Records, I said. Every transfer. Every payment. Every temporary contribution since I was 24. Mark scoffed. You kept receipts. Yes, I said. Because none of you ever did. I stood. I'm not contributing to any family fund. I continued, my voice steady. I'm not covering gaps. I'm not stabilizing anyone else's choices. My mother stared at me like she didn't recognize me. You're abandoning us, she said. I shook my head. No, I'm opting out of being used. Mark pushed back his chair. So that's it? After everything we've done for you? I laughed quietly. Name one thing you've done for me that didn't cost me something. Silence. That was my answer. I'm done, I said. This isn't a pause. It's an ending. I placed a bill on the table for my portion of the lunch. Not theirs. Just mine. Then I walked out. This time no one followed. The fallout was immediate. Within 48 hours, Mark's rent check bounced. My mother called in tears, leaving voicemails that swung between anger and pleading. Extended family reached out, confused, demanding explanations I didn't know. But something else happened too. The pressure stopped working. Because for the first time, they had nothing to hold over me. I'd removed myself from the equation. And systems collapse when their foundation walks away. The silence after I walked away wasn't peaceful. It was volatile. At first, my phone exploded. Missed calls stacked on top of each other like accusations. Voicemails blurred together, my mother crying, Mark snapping, and Aunt reminding me that family doesn't turn its back. I listened to exactly one voicemail all the way through. Elena, my mother said, voice trembling. I don't know what you think you're proving, but people are counting on you. This isn't just about money. This is about loyalty. Loyalty. Another word that had always meant surrender. I deleted the rest without listening. By the end of the week, the tone changed. Mark texted first. We need to talk. Urgently. I didn't reply. Then my aunt emailed. This has caused serious disruption. Your mother hasn't been sleeping. You should reconsider before things get worse. Worse for whom, I wondered. Because for the first time in years, I was sleeping through the night. Without my income quietly smoothing things over, the cracks spread fast. I heard about it through fragments, side comments forwarded by cousins, half-truths whispered by people who suddenly wanted my attention. Mark missed 2 rent payments. He blamed a delay at work. His landlord didn't care. My mother's credit card was declined again, this time at the pharmacy. She called my cousin in tears, asking if she could spot her just this once. Just this once had an expiration date that never arrived. The house I'd been helping to maintain fell behind on utilities. A notice was taped to the door. Neighbors noticed. Questions followed. And suddenly, the narrative shifted. Where I'd once been praised for being reliable, I was now described as cold, calculating, ungrateful. I expected that. What I didn't expect was how little it hurt. Because in the quiet space that followed, something else emerged. Relief. I moved my savings into accounts no one knew about. I canceled a credit card I'd opened in my early 20s for emergencies. I upgraded my apartment, not extravagantly, but intentionally. Furniture I chose. A desk by the window. A couch that wasn't meant to fold out for overnight guests who never left. For the first time, my space belonged entirely to me. I cooked dinners without my phone on the counter. I took walks without bracing myself for interruptions. I started therapy, not because I was broken, but because I wanted language for things I'd never been allowed to name. Control, enmeshment, financial abuse. Hearing those words out loud felt like someone turning on a light in a room I'd lived in for years. 2 weeks after the lunch, my mother showed up at my building unannounced. The doorman called first. "There's a woman here asking for you." I told him I'd meet her in the lobby. She looked smaller somehow. Not weak, just stripped of authority. No polished outfit, no confident posture. Just a woman clutching her purse too tightly. "I didn't know where else to go," she said. I sat across from her, hands folded in my lap. "You could have called." She shook her head. "You wouldn't have answered." She wasn't wrong. We sat in silence for a moment. "I didn't realize how much pressure you were under," she said finally. I met her eyes. "You did." She flinched. "We relied on you," she corrected. "No," I said quietly. "You built a system that required me to stay quiet." Her eyes filled. "I thought you were okay with it." "Because I didn't say no?" I asked. "Or because it was easier not to ask?" She didn't answer. "I'm not cutting you off," I continued. "But I'm not funding this anymore." Her shoulders sagged. "I don't know how we're going to manage." That wasn't my problem. She left after a few minutes, promising nothing, asking for nothing. That was new. In the weeks that followed, the calls slowed. The accusations faded. People adjusted. Not gracefully, not kindly, but they adjusted. Mark took a temporary job he'd once called beneath him. My mother downsized expenses she'd ignored for years. The family learned, slowly, painfully, that my absence didn't create the problem. It revealed it. And in the space where guilt used to live, something sturdier took root. Peace. Months passed, and the silence became a rhythm I hadn't known I'd been missing. My phone no longer buzzed endlessly. My inbox no longer carried veiled demands. I started waking up without the weight of someone else's needs pressing on my chest. I moved fully into my new apartment. The light poured in through the windows just right, and I could leave the blinds open without worrying who might judge my choices. I furnished it slowly, intentionally for me. Every cushion, every lamp, every book on the shelf was a declaration. This space belongs to Elena Parker, not to anyone else. I cooked meals I wanted, not meals meant to please. I bought a jacket I loved, not one deemed appropriate by family standards. I started exercising, reading, sleeping without interruption. For the first time in a decade, my life was mine to shape. A month later, my mother sent a handwritten letter. Tear-stained, shaky handwriting. She didn't ask me to return or forgive. She didn't remind me of obligations. She simply acknowledged the truth. "We treated you like an income stream, not a daughter. I see it now. I'm sorry." That line hit differently than any argument, any plea, any manipulation. It wasn't about control anymore. It was about accountability. I smiled quietly, not because I felt victorious, not because I held power over them, but because acknowledgement without expectation felt like breathing for the first time. Mark texted weeks later. A short line, trying to start fresh. Thank you for showing me the truth. No guilt, no demand, no begging. I didn't reply, and I didn't feel guilty. I started dating again. Slowly, carefully, meeting people who asked what I wanted, who valued presence over paycheck. Dates that weren't punctuated by anxiety about obligations I hadn't agreed to. Conversations about travel, books, music, things that belonged to me and me alone. The family reached out sporadically. My mother once called, hesitant, asking if I wanted to join Thanksgiving. I agreed, but on my terms. I didn't pay, I didn't fund, I didn't negotiate. I just went as myself. The difference was subtle, but profound. No one expected me to subsidize anything. No one assumed my compliance. I was a guest, not an ATM. I learned later that the family fund had collapsed in my absence. Projects that had relied on my stability faltered. Mark adjusted to income he'd ignored. My mother discovered she could manage, painfully and imperfectly, without me bailing them out. They were forced to confront their own choices, the same way I had confronted mine years ago. And for the first time, I realized something crucial. They never loved me. They loved what I provided. And that was never my responsibility. The truth settled in slowly. Once they treated me like an asset, I owed them nothing. Not loyalty, not money, not endless emotional labor. Freedom wasn't something to ask for. It was something to claim. The apartment felt warmer, brighter, freer. I started journaling every night. Not about what I had to give, but about what I wanted to hold close. My goals, my thoughts, my quiet victories. Each page reinforced that my life belonged to me. Months turned into a year. The birthday that had once humiliated me became a distant memory, a reference point for growth. I didn't hold resentment, though I didn't forget. Resentment implies dependence. I had none left. Instead, I carried clarity. The last message I received from my mother read simply, "Proud of you. You've lit the way." And I knew exactly what she meant. I had lit the way, not for them, but for myself. I wasn't just the reliable one anymore. I was my own person. I had boundaries, a life I controlled, and a peace that no one could demand or threaten. That night, I sat in my living room, sipping tea, lights dimmed. I reflected on everything. Years of giving, years of silent endurance, the birthday dinner that had forced the revelation, the confrontation that had changed everything. I realized that freedom isn't a moment, it's a series of choices. Small, deliberate, unwavering. And then I understood the final, liberating truth. You don't owe your family your paycheck. You don't owe them your peace. You don't owe them your life. Because the moment you treat your life as theirs to claim, you give away the very thing you can never get back. I smiled. Not at them. Not in triumph. But at myself. I had chosen me. And in that choice, I had finally arrived. For the first time in my life, the silence wasn't empty. It was full. Full of possibility. Full of freedom. Full of the quiet power that comes from standing up for yourself. Once, finally, without compromise. And that, more than anything, was worth more than any salary, any bonus, any obligation. Because this time, my life was mine.